Actually, for the first show, Professor Amos Guerrero. Always struggle with his last name. Sorry, Professor. And he'll be back next week. And I can't wait to talk to him because so much has happened here in this studio, sort of in the vein of duty to rescue. So for those folks just tuning in, my first guest on this program is a law professor up at the U. And he's written a book, The Crime of Complicity. And in it, Professor Guerrero advocates for a bit of a change in the criminal law. We basically don't have an affirmative duty to help one another. There's not a criminal basis for a failure to act. And Professor Guerrero, in the context of the Holocaust, in which his family was incredibly touched at all levels, both mother and father's side, he really has quite an insight on it. And today, the ultimate topic, what I'm going to kind of lead up to, and hopefully we'll get some calls on it, I'd like to do the same thing, kind of a first segment here, set it up, and then I want to take more calls than we have in the past, Alan. So, again, low on material. But the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church and complicit liability. That's what we're really going to be getting into at sort of coming up. Well, after I set it up a bit, we'll take some calls. And I've got some information on the Catholic Church. I've got some stories to tell myself, and as well as some insights in having attended Catholic ceremonies since all of the scandal and disruptive things that have stained the Catholic Church. And so ultimately, I kind of want to bring it together, Professor Guerrero and the Catholic Church. Because I'll back up a little bit. Maybe I'll do it in the context of the Seinfeld show. So the great Seinfeld show was on for 9 years, I think, 8 years, and then sort of abruptly ended. And every episode was about sort of our own dysfunction, one way or another, whether it's relationships or work or friendships, a lot of relationships. And they upset a lot of people because they were kind of jackasses, if you will. And at the end of the last episode, it's actually 2 episodes. You have to watch both of them to catch the whole thing. But at the end, well, I'm sorry, I got to back up. Jerry had pitched a show to NBC for a sitcom, and it was a show about nothing. So in the end, they landed the show, and they were taking a trip to Europe somewhere, the four of them, Jerry, Elaine, Kramer, and George. And the plane had a problem, and they emergency landing in Massachusetts. And they were stuck there. And then they were on the ground, and they witnessed a big, overweight young guy being harassed and beat up by a couple of people, and they didn't do anything. And they laughed at him and made fun of him. And ultimately, they ended up in jail. And the final scene in Seinfeld is the 4 of them in a cell together. And I love that program. And I thought it was sort of a terrible ending because that ending really wasn't great, the 2 episodes. But the message is kind of profound. It really is. And even when I started this show, it dawned on me when I was interviewing the professor. I'm going to stop trying to say his last name. Professor Amos. Go with his first name. How's that? And it kind of dawned on me there that it was, is that what Jerry Seinfeld was saying ultimately? That there should be an affirmative duty, and they weren't model people. They weren't model people. But in the end, they didn't step up and help out. And so historically, our laws provide that there's no criminal liability for the failure to act. Okay, so you can sit there and watch something awful, and Professor Guerrero had noted in his book, I'm trying to picture the page number, but it would be a wild guess. But what was the kid's name, Alan? The case where the guy raped the young girl in the stall, and his friend was there and didn't do anything. And then at the end, the friend asked if she'd been sexually aroused before the girl was killed. Cash something. In any event, a sex abuse case where to illustrate this complicit liability. And I think that it's nowhere more relevant than in sex abuse situations. And again, I'd like to talk about that. How do you feel about that? Liability, criminal liability for doing nothing. To clarify a little bit, folks want to call in on this. It's really the action that you're required to do is get help, not intervene, but get help. Call for help. So just imagine the most obvious situation where it is just the easiest thing to do to get some help involved. Why not have criminal liability for that?
That's a good question.
Why not? I was indoctrinated in the old common law that's been around for hundreds of years now. And Alan, the principal basis for not imposing criminal liability on us, the great irony is that we're morally good and that we will take care of that ourselves. And I said it a few weeks ago, I'll say it again, I think we've proven ourselves wrong. And even if you feel like you would do something and you're in that moral place where you would do something, that's terrific. But do we need laws to encourage others? And I think it would just have an incredible ripple effect on domestic violence and child abuse.
It would.
And because it's just going to reach a little further, more people are going to be accountable, and you can't hide from it. And it's all going to segue to the Catholic Church. But I'll back up a little bit. I've got a few themes here I noticed sort of emerging from my discussions and interviews and questions. One of them is resources. After 25 years of being a lawyer, there is one ultimate truth. A couple weeks ago I'm saying there's no truth. There's one ultimate truth. It's money.
Yeah.
Money makes people do things.
It does.
And if there is a financial incentive for whatever it may be, it'll get done. And there we're talking about resources, right? I say money, it's resources. Old friend of mine used to say, if you have a problem that money can solve, you don't have a problem. Isn't that great? I've reminded myself of that many times. I don't know if it does any good, but I try. Resources. It's all about resources. And I think that we really need to sort of reevaluate where we're at with those resources. One thing that in my mind has really come up lately is just the rise and prevalence of, and the rise of awareness and actually how far spread it is, the number of people that struggle with mental illness. And, when I was younger, it was taboo. Nobody talked about it. And so now people are talking about it. And I think that we're still so maybe in our infantile, I don't know if that's the right word, infancy of dealing with it, that we don't know quite how to deal with it. But I had Sergeant Sampson on from the Unified Police, who explained to us how social worker coming in like the B squad to different situations and working with families and criminals or alleged criminals to kind of take some of the emotion out of that hot issues. I'm just looking out. Do we have the volume up on the local one? Yeah. Okay. All about the resources. Then the other theme I've got going here is conflicts of interest. There's always a conflict of interest everywhere. None of us are completely aligned. Husband, wife, conflict of interest, in some sense. I shouldn't. Maybe I won't go that far. But I use the example: if you hire a lawyer, you can't hire a lawyer to hire a lawyer, because you'd have to hire a lawyer to hire that lawyer. And it's just an inescapable conflict of interest. And at some point, a client needs to take a leap of faith and trust the lawyer, and that is true everywhere.
Agreed.
Everywhere. And it comes back to this recurring theme of, who's got the final word. And again, I said it last week, I'll repeat it here again. I think there's too many people focused on being right, being correct. Look, I won. My side's right. Your side's wrong. I hear it on the radio. It's like a competition. It's like a sports competition. And it's not that one side is right and the other side is wrong. It's a balance. And it's a delicate balance, and one not to be taken lightly. Our legislative system, our judicial system, the Supreme Court of the United States' involvement in day-to-day aspects of our lives. That's how it is, and it's interesting to talk about that stuff and see how it plays out. And here in Utah, there's one fascinating political thing playing out right now. Grab my Salt Lake Tribune. Navajos take the majority down in San Juan County, and so there you've got a shift where you've got some Native Americans that have taken over the county commission. I say the majority now, the county commission down there. Isn't it fascinating times? Talk with Ted. It's 4:24 on Tuesday afternoon. A beautiful, beautiful day out here in Salt Lake City. Absolutely gorgeous. A little bit warm for early January. I mean, I'm out here with no jacket on. So that concerns me a little bit, maybe a little too warm. But it's been snowing in the mountains. Nobody's complaining about a lack of snow or terrible season. And the tourists are in town, so be nice to the tourists, because we need them. And again, this is Ted McBride, and I am here with my good buddy Alan, who is saving me time and time again. Alan's handling the phones and the soundboard here, so I can concentrate, or try to. But I want to take some calls because Dick Perry, the owner of the station here, reminded me that it is a two-way talk radio program, and my program is Talk with Ted, and I do a lot of the talking. So if somebody wants to give us a shout, talk about anything, educate us on something, 801-254-1640. The lines are open, and Alan is ready to take a call. Until then, a little more rambling on, because I'm just amazed, Alan, at how the program here. So we've got the professor with the crime of complicity, and I'm going to tie that to the Catholic Church here in just a bit. I had Ian Adams on a program a few months ago, and Ian hasn't called me to take me out to lunch yet. So if he's listening, I'm still waiting for that call, Ian. But Ian is the executive director of the Fraternal Order of Police, and he had an incredible story about shooting someone and being investigated by the district attorney, and the conflicts that arise there in those situations, and body cams, and how difficult it is to be a police officer. And now today's headline news. If this doesn't break your heart, nothing will. Provo bids a heartfelt farewell to officer.
Hello?
Joseph Shiner.
Do you have a comment for Ted? Do you have a comment for Ted?
They had his funeral today, police officer here in Utah. So if you see a cop today, thank a cop. It's a tough job, and they make an amazing sacrifice. And as Ian pointed out, or we discussed, I don't worry about committing a felony when I go to work. If I make a mistake, it's not going to be a felony. And for police officers, it can be. It can be. And what a difficult job, and just a day to remember that. Jody Sampson Sergeant Jody Sampson, Unified Police, talking about mental health. And in the paper today, we've got an update on the situation in Rio Grande. And Rio Grande, of course, downtown Salt Lake City, was raided, what, a little more than a year ago, Alan, where they busted up the Rio Grande. And it's still bad down there. And there's homeless people taking advantage of homeless people and sex trafficking and, people stealing from each other. And it's just a terrible, terrible situation that we've got down there in Salt Lake City with all the homeless. I've got someone on the phone who wants to talk about the border wall. That is awesome. Let's do it. Hi, this is Ted. Can you hear me?
Yeah, how you doing today?
Good. Who have I got?
This is Rob. I'm just, thinking about this border wall, and I'm just wondering, why doesn't the president send in the, let's see, what division of government would you send in to apprehend these politicians in these states that are, breaking federal law, committing a felony, not upholding their oath of honor?
Be a little more specific, Rob.
Well, we're talking about the felony that they're committing by aiding and abetting illegal aliens. I mean, these people they're defrauding our voting system. I mean, it's been proven. I mean, that should be.
So you think it's watered down because you think
that one reason,
and that the immigrants would vote Democrat? Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's why they don't want the wall, because and they're voting Democrat because they're getting free stuff. They're getting free health care. They're getting free education. They're getting food stamps. And there were $21 trillion in debt, $21.7 trillion in debt. These Democrats don't have a problem with sending our boys over to foreign countries and leaving them there for 5 years at $50 billion a year. And they're crying about $5 billion to get to build this border wall?
That's true, Rob. I'm going to make a couple comments on that. Feel free to call back, okay? Boy, the border wall is such a hot issue, Alan. Such a hot issue, and that Rob, there, those are legitimate concerns.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to cut you off there, Rob. I'm not completely up to date on the what's going on there. I've been out of touch with the news a little bit, but it's an issue, and they're coming. And what do you do with that? I don't know what you do with that. With 5,000 people coming up, because at that point, it's a bit of a humanitarian crisis as well. It's not just a matter of saying, rounding them up and putting them away. And what an incredibly difficult issue. I wish I had answers for it. I know the one answer would help all of us, because I was just about to say it with the homeless. Resources. It's about the economy.
Yes.
It's all about the economy. Because when people work, they feel good, they make money, take care of themselves, they have opportunity. And I think even all of the drug use, it's just that so many people feel that they just don't have any opportunity. The one comment that Rob just made, it's just, again, a little bit hard to kind of throw the blanket over everyone, because there are a lot of hardworking immigrants that have immigrated and can help, contribute to this unique country we have. Don't get me wrong, we need borders. There's got to be law. And we shouldn't encourage lawlessness. I do believe that very strongly. We can't encourage lawlessness. And part of the government shutdown, that's a little bit of lawlessness right now. Where's the feds? It can't last for much longer. It can't last for much longer. Mia Love. I spoke about Mia Love a month or two ago, and I attended that hearing. Alan, you weren't here that day. But I went down to West Jordan and attended the hearing when Mia Love had sued Ben McAdams over the ballots and the counting, to stop the counting. And that was such an interesting issue. And what she lost just by the skin of her teeth, and still had issues with President Trump. And you see what she's doing now?
No.
Right here, page one, Salt Lake Tribune. You folks aren't going to have to log on and look at the Tribune. I got it here for you. She's working for CNN.
Really?
Mia Love.
Wow.
Yep.
That's great.
Just signed on with CNN. So you'll be able to see her on reliable sources. So Mia is not out of the spotlight. And it'll be interesting to see how Ben McAdams does. The last theme I've got in this program, or the last one that kind of dawned on me, is, well, two things. Kind of pop culture. I like to kind of bring everything pop culture, and also to sort of bring it back, way back. And, of course, I got to throw a basketball reference in every time. And, boy, have I had fun with that. TJ Hawes, BYU kid, great fun. Jimmer Fredette, I'm still just trembling about that. That Jimmer, the Jimmer has befriended me. Maybe he's listening to something. I want to get Jimmer Fredette on here. Tell us about China. Tell us about your life, the NBA, the struggle. On the brink for so long, and then he's in China and scores 75 points a game, and he's a hero. I couldn't understand why he. Well, I'm pretty good at predicting basketball players, and I thought he'd be a real good pro. And maybe just a little bit too slow defensively, but I love that kid. Didn't he? Wasn't that exciting?
He's a great player.
Okay, it's not a show about Jimmer. And one more pitch, Donovan Mitchell. Another guy that can comment on Utah culture, tell his story, and I am after Donovan Mitchell, as well as Mayor Brzezinski, Salt Lake City. I would like to get her here as well. So hopefully we'll have some interesting stuff coming up. I got thinking about the Catholic Church. And I've been thinking about the Catholic Church for a while. I was raised Catholic. I'm going to give you a little biography now to kind of set up a little bit of this context. But I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic grammar school, Catholic high school. Never took a bus one day in my life, Alan, to school. Walked across the street to grammar school. And the high school was about a mile away, John S. Burke High School in Goshen, New York. I was there just a couple weeks ago. And like many communities, or most communities, Goshen was not untouched by the Catholic Church sex scandal. There was one priest, in fact, that I knew quite well. We grew up across the street. I grew up across the street from the church and the convent and the rectory. I knew all of them. Alan, one time I asked the nuns across the street if I could borrow some eggs that my sister was making a cake.
Yeah.
And we needed 8 of them. They were a little skeptical. We took them and threw them at a car or something and got caught with that. So the nuns knew us as well. And shout out to Sister Ann, because I think she might have been involved in that. But I know the church. I have family that's priests in Ireland. I have my mother's sister, the greatest person I've ever met, is a Catholic nun who just celebrated 60 years of service.
Wow.
And can't say enough about her. When I went to Catholic school, Alan, way back when, to the grammar school, there probably about half the grammar school teachers were sisters, were nuns, including the principal of the school. Guess how many now at St. John's Elementary on Murray Avenue in Goshen, New York, 1st through 8th grade? Guess how many sisters there are at the school?
30 nuns?
0.
0. Why?
No more nuns. Because they're just not joining the convent. My high school, in John S. Burke on Fletcher Street in Goshen, New York, I had Sister Mary McCarthy was my principal. Well, that was early on. But guess how many sisters at the high school, Alan?
How many?
0.
Wow.
So there you have a Catholic school, 2 of them, 1 through 12, and you don't have a single instructor that's either, well, I'll say a teacher as either a nun or a priest or somebody involved with the church, because there is just no more. There's a shortage of women entering the convent, and it's just dried up. I didn't realize it was that bad. I went back home and I visited both schools. The principal of the high school, we played basketball together. John's outfit. He's great to see John. But no nuns there. No nuns. And you think about that on the effect of these Catholic schools, because when I went to Catholic school, we feared the nun with the ruler, right? And we were, right? It was scary, but and not really. It wasn't scary. But what do? It's just a fascinating thing. You want to raise your kids in a Catholic school, and it's just different than it used to be. And I think my daughter's calling me, which means she's not listening to me.
That's not good.
Yeah, it's not good. But a shortage there. Nuns, the enrollment is still fine, but there are no sisters. You've got the same phenomenon happening worldwide with priests. And the lack of new priests. And then, of course, many of the current priests are elderly. They're getting old.
Yes.
There's a little less than 500,000 priests in the world. 400 and something thousand, 450,000 priests in the world, Catholic priests. And that is today, 2019. I think the low 400s, I want to say. In 1970, about the same number.
Wow.
So you think, well, that sounds good, right? Here's the problem. The church has gotten twice as big during that time.
The Catholic Church?
The Catholic Church has doubled in size in members since the 1970s. And a lot of that growth is in Africa, Australia, but really Africa is really like a big growth area now. And there aren't enough priests to go around. We know it here. I feel it even up in Park City. They've struggled, to find full-time priests. Wow, I'm going a little deeper than I thought on this. It might take me a little longer, but because I've got a few more things to share before I kind of turn it wide open. Woman has something to say about that guy, right? He's singing that she's all wrong, right? I just have a funny feeling it goes 2 ways. Funny thing, Alan, music. They asked me on the way in today. I've been playing all these old tracks from other shows. It's Mark Shurtleff's old show, and finally getting some music together. So I'll have that going. But I've got to be careful because I like heavy metal. And I'm just afraid I'd lose too many viewers busting out some heavy metal. I'd like to get the Scorpions out there. Winds of Change, Scorpions. But there will be some new music. But that got me thinking. My most famous celebrity sighting, okay? 1998 at the Canyon Ski Resort. And Black Sabbath was playing in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I saw Ozzy Osbourne skiing at the canyons in 1998. So you never know who you're going to see on the slope. So Ozzy might be up there, although I don't think he's probably can't. Well, maybe. Who knows? Ozzy might be skiing. So be nice to the tourists. This is Ted McBride. I feel like I'm always saying that because I don't know if people are tuning in or not. But I'm a lawyer here in Salt Lake City, Utah. I've been here for 21 years. I love Utah. I first came here in 1988 with a college buddy, and I had powder up to my waist, and that was it. I love this place. And it really is a great place. And more people are figuring that out. Great Utah. But I'm talking about the Catholic Church crisis today. And I don't think it gets enough attention, even though it's big. And I don't think it gets enough of what to do, how to help people, and how to prevent it again. And because if you look, Alan, at some of the how it's taken care of, sometimes is a lawsuit with money and a payout, and that's what I do for a living. And I was involved in a case in 1994 in Goshen, New York, against Father Ed Papala, who had abused a number of young boys in our church. And we had it right there. I was in the hen house, Alan, growing up. I was in the hen house. And by the time that Father Papala came around, I was too old. But he was there, and he did some jail time, and he's back out. There's websites where you can see where these people live when they get back out. And I'm going to come up with some statistics here in a minute. But in addition to, the lawsuit that we had, it was with my Uncle Jack. We sued the Catholic Church, the Archdiocese, in 1994. And it was one of the early cases. There were cases all the way back in the 80s as well, but very different than it is now. Now if somebody came to me with a case like that, I could sue the church, and there wouldn't be much question about the church's responsibility, not just the person that did the crime. Okay. But back in the mid-90s, it wasn't like that. Wasn't that clear cut, because all of this was still emerging, and it was the idea that, well, these priests are sort of they're too far afield of their duties as priests, so the church isn't responsible. Sort of like the driver that takes a detour to get a six-pack. Right. That's kind of what they were saying here. Well, wait, that's a detour to get a six-pack, and we still prevailed. That case settled, but now there's really no defense in that regard, because too many people knew. But what I'm troubled about with it's money, people need to be paid out, but resources, and to make sure it doesn't happen again, which of course is impossible. And when I say it doesn't happen again, what is it? Holy cow, how do you even define what went on behind the veil of goodness? And it was evil. And it destroyed people's lives. At my high school, okay, Father Skinner, 2 of them in my hometown, Alan. And I don't know Father Skinner's fate, but I know the fate of some of his victims. I know that, and it's not pretty. And there are so many people hurt by sexual abuse of children. And you hear, for years with the Catholic Church, is there a problem with the priests being celibate? And is it fostering, that kind of thing? And then you look and they say, well, it's no different statistically than other religions and other organizations, and, on and on and on. Well, then they all need to be fixed, because it's just too much. It's just too much. And what is the church doing other than paying out some money to care for the people that have been so affected by this? And it's not just the people that have been abused, that have been touched, and their families. And I say touched, physically touched. This scandal has rocked that church. Rocked it. And I feel it, because I've been going to that church forever. And now you go in, and you got to ask yourself, is this one a good one or a bad one?
This meaning?
The priest. You can't help it. And I feel bad for the good ones, because they're not all bad.
Right.
And the women in the Catholic Church are awesome. They're the best people in the world. But I don't understand how so many people can remain silent, still to this day. So it was back in this scandal really erupted. It started coming out in the 90s, and in about 2002, it really blew up that it was worldwide. Okay, and it was supposed to be, this cleanup and the church taking affirmative actions that this doesn't happen again, get to the bottom of it. And then, as we know, just this past year, just last summer, the report came out of Pennsylvania, the grand jury report, that 500 incidents over the course of, it might have been 30 years or so, but an incredible number of incidents and fact patterns that would just blow your mind. And it's a grand jury, and I'm not sure what indictments or anything will come of that, but and I wonder what Utah's doing. And the other states. And there's some things in the news here about a Catholic priest here, maybe inappropriately touching someone way back when. I've got some loose details in my head here, Alan. But when you go into the Catholic Church now, you got to ask yourself, because I have, is this a good one or a bad one? And it's a little bit hard for me to distinguish for a couple of reasons. One, I don't know them. Two, I don't know what it means, what level of knowledge, suspicion, coordination, or do you have to have before you're responsible institutionally. And after 2002, I expected that the church would sort of blow the whistle on some of their own in a far greater way than has been done so far. A far greater way. And programs to help people and to look at some changes. What could be done so this doesn't happen again? Alan, I was an altar boy when I was in first grade. In the Catholic Church, you receive First Communion in about second grade. Right? You're baptized as an infant, and then you receive your First Communion, where you participate in the taking of the Holy Eucharist during the Mass. And you needed to do that before you could be an altar boy. Well, my buddy was an altar boy, and I was in first grade, and I pleaded, and Monsignor McCaffrey let me in. And I think back to my childhood. We had these priests, and they had names. It meant something. They were leaders. They were important people, and there were lots of good people. And it's just so tarnished now. It's so. How do you differentiate? But it really troubles me that the church didn't investigate it more or have resources available to people. So, which leads me to my next point. Some of the Catholics would say, we are doing that. We are doing that. And there's a little bit of truth to that. So the Vatican, okay, I'm going to segue back into this. The Vatican is in Italy. It's a nation state. It's a city state, right. Sort of its own country. Right. There's part of me that thinks it needs to be invaded to get the documents, to uncover the evil. Do you know when it became a nation state, the Vatican?
I have no idea.
1929.
That recent?
Right? That's what I thought too. 1929. And I know that I've seen discussions, articles, etc., that the church has records that they're not turning over. And it really amazes me how institutions operate. Because you get two people together, and they can kind of split up the evil and more easily do something that's not ethical than if you're all alone. Yeah. Now you get 3 people together. You get 4 people together. Now those people that are together have one common interest, the organization that they're all part of. And it's kind of like, you can sell your soul at work, right? I quit my job 4 months ago because I didn't agree with something. I'll leave it at that. But I quit. You got to draw the line somewhere and not just say, well, you know what, I can't do that. I've got to get my paycheck. I've got to feed my family, and I need to do that too. And fortunately, you know, I was in a position where I could quit my job. Many people aren't, and you get kind of tied to the organization, and it becomes a bit of a conflict. And then the organization can't even kind of see itself. But you know, if you turn a blind eye once or twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, and now some time goes by, there's a period of time where you can step up and save face, right? But if you've been hanging on to it for 25 years and it happened 8 other times under your watch, right? Then you can't come clean with it.
Right.
You just can't.
Right.
There's nothing to come clean with other than a guilty plea.
Right.
And so there was a conference scheduled for November of the, what are you looking at? Oh, music. Good timing. I was just about to launch in. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops were supposed to get together in November, and that was canceled. I'll talk about that when I come back. That's going to be different next week, I think.
Okay.
Might have a little rush on here.
Rush hour.
Hope we don't turn the people away. It is rush hour now. Welcome back. My name is Ted McBride. This is Talk with Ted, a show about nothing on 1640 K-Talk, Salt Lake City, Utah. And we're right here in Murray. It's starting to get dark out. I always think of the people up on the mountain, a few stragglers trying to get down. Good time to hurt yourself is late in the day skiing. No guest today, so I'm rambling on, talking now about the Catholic Church and the scandal that has rocked the Catholic Church and some fallout already with the number of sisters, nuns dwindling. And I started the show pointing that out, that I went to Catholic parochial school as well as Catholic high school, and probably about half of the administrators and teachers in the grammar school were sisters or nuns when I was a kid, and they lived right next door to the church and the convent, which is just about directly across the street from my house where I grew up. And Mom and Dad got married in St. John's. It's all of it means everything to us. It's where the family goes for the celebrations, for the including death, and it's hard right now being Catholic. Period.
Sure.
It's hard right now being Catholic and not feeling like you're somehow complicit, or that you can't trust your leaders. It's put that doubt on it because it's been infiltrated by evil. And I said earlier, I was involved in a lawsuit against the Archdiocese of New York back in the mid-'90s when this wasn't as clear as it is now. The church has paid out, I think, billions in settlements, and they're working now, Alan. The issue now is how to deal with the allegations that are against bishops, so not just the priests. And I'm kind of scratching my head. Well, what do you mean? How do you deal with the allegations? You know, somebody says that they were sexually abused, you investigate it. And of course, there's always room for abuse, people filing lawsuits that aren't victims. And there's been a big study by I think it was a law professor somewhere, but that did a big, a guy that defended, what it was, he defended a lot of priests and then wrote a book. And figured about 10% of the cases were fake, were made up, but that 90% of them were legit.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yes, I thought I would expect it to be opposite.
No. And so there's lots of valid complaints. But again, the thing that troubles me is that when all of this came out, really hit the national or the world stage in 2002, I expected the church to call out their own and get rid of them. And I don't see that that's happened. And it may be that they're incapable of doing it. So conflicted. But I don't understand how my church, Alan, and I was in that hen house that they created, that they subjected so many little kids to risk, and so many of them got hurt. And now they're canceling a meeting back in November, a meeting of the bishops, the U.S. bishops, okay, for a meeting on how to creation of a new commission to handle allegations of abuse against bishops. So they're setting up a new commission for allegations of abuse against bishops. It just kind of seems like they're supervising their own there. And so I just don't know what good that's going to do. And a new commission, whatever. We're talking about child sex abuse. And one of the problems, Alan, is that this is so outrageous, so offensive, so harrowing that people are afraid to talk about it. And it's so disabling to the faith of the members of the Catholic Church. And I'm not speaking for everybody by any stretch, but I know people are affected by it big time. And I just don't see enough response. And of course, back in 2002 was when this really came out. But just this year, we had the report come out of Pennsylvania with the 500 incidents. We had the Cardinal McCormick, who had been endorsed by the Pope and then had to resign. And right now, there's a criminal trial beginning in France against a bishop. And it's the first one, I believe, the first trial against a bishop. I think it just started yesterday. So I'll be following that and bringing back some reports. But how is it that so many people are abused? How is it? Where did it happen? How did it happen? Was it on retreats? Was it after Mass? Was it? How did it happen? And if this is what it is, then no boy should be left alone with a priest anymore.
Right.
The buddy system. It's not rocket science.
Right.
And where are they? I told you there were two priests in my hometown. One, he married my sister and brother-in-law in 1988. And then in 1994-95, my next-door neighbor, Joe Brown, great guy, and a lawyer, defended Father Papala, and Father Papala ended up in jail. I was in college, but he asked me if I would like to go on a trip to the New Jersey shore. I was probably 20 years old. No, I was 21. And I said, no, thank you. Well, as it turns out, he was taking boys down to the Jersey shore and doing awful things and ceremonial things and just crazy, absolutely crazy. And it feels like we don't even want to talk about it. Just, the boys got abused, some girls got abused, and that's it. Yep, they got abused, that's it. And now we're dealing with it. It feels like such an incredible inadequate response to me. Incredible. And, I'm going to back up a little bit. So the other day, it's so weird, Alan, how all of these topics that I pick and themes are kind of all coming together. Yeah. But it's because I guess it's stuff that I've just always been interested in. But if you've heard me before, I'm so fascinated with that tsunami in Japan in March of 2011. And if you've never seen some real videos of it, it's so amazing how that water came in and destroyed that place. And of course, the nuclear plant there. But last week I was talking about the book Candide by the philosopher, author Voltaire. I don't know what else he wrote. This is the only one I ever read. But love that guy's name, Voltaire. That was inspired in part by the great tsunami, the great earthquake in 1755, and the tsunami that followed 40 minutes later. 40 minutes later, kaboom, this wall of water just engulfs the city, catches it on fire, destroys 80% of the city, including a whole bunch of Catholic churches. And back at the time, of course, they thought it was a divine message. Maybe they weren't doing things right, but I'm not going to get into that. But Voltaire, this great philosopher in this age of reason, wrote a book, Candide. And Candide was raised in isolation by the great philosopher Pangloss. And Pangloss was an exaggeration of the philosophy of reason, that there's a reason for everything. And he would connect together the most far-fetched things and say, see, there's a reason. And Candide went around the world and suffered horribly. War, rape, just everything you can imagine. Just bad. And it questioned this optimism. We got to stay optimistic. And Candide and his group, he picked up a couple of stragglers on the way. They got back home, and their message was sort of build a wall, take care of your garden, prepare. And that it's okay to lose some of that optimism and even that maybe religious ideology, that it's all for something better, right? And so you can see how Voltaire probably wasn't very well liked by the religious people, because it kind of questions that faith a little bit. And don't just sit back and wait for it to come to you and say that it's all going to be okay and that's the best that it is. You get to work. You build a wall. You plant a garden. And you take care of yourself. And you can still have a happy life without sacrificing, your religious beliefs and that faith. And so it was a big deal, and it's a great book. Where am I going with that? I don't even know. But the Catholic Church, okay, so they had 80% of them wiped out then. So I know where I'm going with that. Voltaire, one of the things that inspired Voltaire to write Candide was what he perceived to be an incredibly inadequate response to human suffering. And he calls out the Catholic Church. Because what he saw then, what are we talking, 270 years ago? Is it that long ago?
Yeah.
Wow. But he saw leaders of the Catholic Church, men, right, living very well, and apparently not caring for folks in Voltaire's humble opinion as closely as they should. So, and what do you know, Alan? Here we are again. Because the church just had a tsunami, and it flooded every church in the world. Every Catholic church in the world got hit by a tsunami. And that tsunami was the institutional abuse that was allowed to happen for decades, and taking lives away from young people for your physical pleasure. It's so wrong. It's so outrageously wrong. And it's not enough to just mention it every now and again in Sunday Mass, or to pray for the people, which we should, but it's not enough. Candide, if Candide were in charge of the Catholic Church, he'd give it a facelift. What do we got? Welcome back. It is 5:23. You are listening to Talk with Ted, a show about nothing. My name is Ted McBride. I'm a lawyer here in Salt Lake City. And today we're talking a bit about the Catholic Church and kind of tying it into some of our prior themes here on the show. And before I get back to the Catholic Church, I'm going to tell a quick side story. Alan, 2002, I think it was, 2003, I was at a wedding in New York City at, it wasn't Tavern on the Green, it was like the other one. I forget the name of it now, Carriage House maybe or something like that. And my dear friend Christopher and his wife Susanna got married, and Susanna's father was a lawyer in New York City. He was also a D-Day survivor. He fought in D-Day. Jewish man in New York City and represented Broadway. And one of his clients was Joe Pesci. And Joe Pesci is a real good friend of his. Susanna's father has now passed away, but Joe Pesci was a client and friend. And I went to the wedding, and my dad with me, and Joe Pesci's a smoker. So was my dad. So what do you think happened? We're hanging out on the back deck with Joe Pesci. And there have been many times that My Cousin Vinny is one of my favorite movies ever. And there's a great scene in that movie that I've used many times to explain sort of the role of a lawyer, especially if I'm defending a case. I'll tell a little story. And if you haven't seen My Cousin Vinny, great movie. Maybe you can pick it up at Blockbuster. So still got Blockbuster on 7th East there.
They're all gone.
But Joe Pesci plays a lawyer that whose nephew gets arrested in a drive south. And what the kid does, he steals a can of tuna fish. And then he gets brought in by the police and he gets interrogated for a murder. But he doesn't know he's being interrogated about the murder. And he finally, there's a point of confusion. And the kid says, I did what? And the interrogator says, you killed so-and-so. And the kid's response was, I killed Bill? Exclamation. And when it got to trial, that officer was being asked questions about that conversation, and he said, well, what did he say? And he said, I killed Bill.
Oh.
Instead of, I killed Bill, he said, I killed Bill. And all you had to do, Alan, was take that line off of the exclamation point and leave just the period, and he's in jail for the rest of his life. And that's what sort of a lawyer does. And the great irony of that is that, Joe Pesci, here I meet this movie star, and he was talking all about himself. I did notice that was all about Joe. When I finally got a word in, he kind of looked at me. I was like, yeah, there you go. I'm the real lawyer. You playing well. But he was a nice guy. But it was just fascinating that I was able to kind of share that with him. But he did kind of look at me like it was the real thing, And it's just a great little story because there can't be anything simpler than changing context than in like that statement.
Yeah.
And that's what we lawyers do, manipulating it one way or the other. Ian Adams knows that. I think he spent some time with some lawyers. So that's my little law reference for the day. Have I thrown out a basketball reference? Have I already did a plug for Donovan Mitchell?
No, you didn't put a call out on the show. Donovan
Mitchell's got to call. He's got to contact us somehow. I'm not going to give up. So I can't wait till we have him on. We'll just be positive about it, Alan. Back to the Catholic Church. It is now 5:27, getting a little darker. I do notice the days are a little bit longer, a little bit lighter. Boy, December is hard when it's pitch black at 5 o'clock. And so we're kind of inching into that really beautiful time. I love February in Utah. Who doesn't love February in Utah?
Me?
It's spectacular. And March. I got to get some skiing. I haven't done enough skiing. Back to the Catholic Church. I'll do another short recap. I hope I'm not going to bore people. But my name is Ted McBride. I'm a lawyer here in Salt Lake City, Utah. I grew up in Goshen, New York, about an hour north of New York City. And then I went to law school in Vermont, practiced in New York for a few years, and came to Utah. So I was in New York, Vermont, and Utah, like some other. The law school that I went to was right near Sharon, Vermont,
okay,
which is the birthplace of Joseph Smith. And many people here know that and make that journey. But isn't that funny? Utah, New York, and Vermont. I got that in common. But I moved here in 98? Absolutely love Utah to ski before the Olympics. What a thrilling time that was. And I moved to a place where I was a minority. Maybe not in Park City, but in Utah, generally, a minority, at least a religious minority. And at the same time, there's a giant Catholic cathedral on South Temple, right?
Right.
About, a half a mile from the temple? Maybe a mile? Oh, no, it's got to be less than a mile. It's on like 3rd or 4th east, right? And that awesome church, that's a beautiful, beautiful cathedral. And that was built in like 1895, 1898. But I always think back to what it must have been like then. People complain now that, the state's controlled by the church, et cetera. Imagine then, way back, 130, 140 years ago, had to be quite a different place. But I marvel at that gigantic cathedral, 125 years old, on South Temple Street,
Right.
just up the street from the temple. It's an interesting place. It's not all LDS. It's that beautiful, beautiful Catholic church. I've been in it many times. There's a choir there. It's lovely. But I remember being surprised. Oh, a gigantic Catholic cathedral just down the road. Who knew? But Utah's just got some great, great stuff. Great, great stuff. But before I moved here, I was involved in a lawsuit against the Catholic Church in the 1990s for abuse that took place in my parish, my church, which was located across the street from where I grew up. And it was a real big thing. It was an awful thing. So many people and families affected by it. And I know still to this day, people are affected by it. And it just rocked the community. It rocked the community. And there was a similar one at my high school that was also the same way. And as I said earlier, I was in that hen house. I've been talking about drunk drivers, right? The limit, and how on New Year's Eve I felt safer on the road with the .05 limit.
Yeah.
Because there's some kind of deterrent. And we're wising up. And drunk drivers put other people at a higher risk than they're putting them at, right? So we kind of have this contract with one another. We'll have this tolerable amount of risk that we'll take with each other, but it reaches a point we say, wait a second, that's too risky, right? And we start drawing the lines. And we need to start drawing lines on complicit liability in criminal cases with sex abuse. It's ultimately not that hard to draw the line. Because no matter what it is, it's a gray area and judgment call, whether you're talking about manslaughter versus just a fight or an assault. We have that challenge every time we apply a standard on how it is defined. And we just have these big, broad terms. What is reasonable? And that same type of thing would apply in the complicit liability. Well, what's reasonable? And maybe it's just not even what's reasonable, because that's sort of what the old law is predicated on. But we need to motivate people to do something. We need to motivate people to do something, especially in the context of this institutional behavior, because that's what it is. It's institutional behavior. And I think the Boy Scouts had it, at one point. It's not unique to the Catholic Church,
Right.
but it's unique in the sense that it's the gigantic church of the world in Africa, in Australia. It's of course, it's the Catholic Church. And, in 2002, this was after the cases, there were a few of them that I was involved in, and they were fought hard. And they were some of the early cases. My uncle was forging some new ground in federal court down in White Plains against the church across the street.
Wow.
Yeah, it was interesting stuff. But now, it comes out in 2002. Oh, my last point, I'm sorry. So the heightened risk with the DUI people. I was in that hen house. We all were. In that heightened risk. If our parents knew where we were, and the risk that we were under, it never would have happened. It was concealed, and it was also with the cloak of religious righteousness. If I can't trust Teddy with Father so-and-so, then who could I possibly trust him with? And I'm not saying that nobody got entrusted with Teddy, but it's what an incredible risk. And what's going on now? What have they done? I was in church a couple of weeks ago. There's Boy Scouts or altar boys. Listen to me, Boy Scouts, altar boys, and a couple of priests. And I mentioned a bit ago. So the Catholics are now walking into church and facing the question about whether the priest in front of them is a good one or a bad one. And how do you define a good one and a bad one? Because the church's response was so woefully inadequate for the awful damage that was caused. And the church can say, oh, you know what, it's just a bunch of rogue priests. That's really not us. That's not what we're about. Well, you know what? It happened under your roof. And to that extent, it is about you. And of course it's about them. But I don't understand how they're not coming out. How come people aren't coming out and saying something? We see that that Pennsylvania report with 500 cases. And what, you're telling me that nobody else knows? Nobody knows anything except the perpetrator? Is that how it all went down? All around the world, all over the world. Only one that knew was just the perpetrator. I don't believe that.
It's in the culture.
And they move them around. They move the priests around. So I got started with the show about the number of priests in the world. So now I'm back to that. Interesting stuff. 1970, it was about 450,000 priests in the world. And I think the population, the Catholics might have been about a billion two, something like that. And there's a ratio there, right? And now there are about the same number of priests, 450,000, give or take a few. And you think, okay, where's the shortage? It is inevitable, and it's a crisis in and of itself, separate and apart from the sex abuse scandal, the sex abuse horror. But this is, many of those priests are older now, many of them. And just like the sisters that I spoke about earlier, you don't have young women going into the convent like you did years ago. And so at the schools that I grew up and went through religious training with some wonderful women, beautiful people, these nuns in the Catholic Church, I can't tell you. And I feel for them too, because the women in the Catholic Church are awesome. I got off track.
You're on track.
What was I talking about?
Talking about the ratio.
Thank you. That's why I got you here, Alan. Keep me on track. My head doesn't explode. Ratios. Okay, so now not every parish in the country here has a priest. There are hundreds, if not thousands. I don't know where my notes are. Hang on. Here you go. 49,153 parishes in the world had no resident priest. 50,000 churches.
Wow.
No priest. 50,000 churches. Catholic Church, mind you. Without a priest. So between 1970 and 2012, the number of priests declined from, here are the accurate numbers, 419,728, so 420,000, to 414,000. So we're down just 6,000, Alan, in 30, well, however long that is. Oh, God, I'm old now. It's 50 years almost. And you think, okay, well, what's the problem? Well, a lot of them are old. And during that time, the Catholic population has doubled. And there are now over 2 billion Catholics, I think it is. And so there are many fewer priests per member. I'm drawing a blank here.
Per parish?
Per individual.
Oh,
okay. And so it's much fewer. So the Philippines, okay, a very Catholic country.
Right.
You know how many islands are in the Philippines?
I don't.
6,000. That country is made up of 6,000 islands. Imagine trying to rule that place. That's why there's all gangs and stuff. But largely Catholic. There's one priest for every 8,000 Catholics.
One priest.
8,000.
Okay.
Okay.
So help me understand. Priest, bishop. What's their role? How's it different than the LDS church?
Okay. Perfect. And I don't know if I can explain it exactly, but sometimes we use a little. We have some of the same terms that mean different things. So thank you. And that ties into another thought. So we've got the declining number of priests, and I think most people know the priest, right? The white collar with the black, and then the hierarchy is, the bishop would be over that. So the bishop would have a broader area. So in New York, it was the Archdiocese of New York. Okay, then above that you have the cardinal. From the cardinal to the Vatican and the Pope. And when I come back, it's going to be the final segment of questioning Catholicism and the problems that they have. Hey, I'm back, and now it is dark out, 5:45. Some folks might be tuning in on their way home. Drive safe out there. Alan, quick side note, because I wanted to tell a story last week that I don't think I did. We were talking a few weeks ago about conflicts of interest and judges.
Yeah.
And I think I covered this on the Tuesday show that we didn't air, so I can't keep track if I'm repeating Thursday, but I don't think so. And we were talking about judges and the conflict that they have and how difficult it is to be a judge, that you really kind of give up a bit of your private life. And I told a story about Judge Hilder lived up in Summit County, and he felt like he couldn't go to the grocery store without bumping into someone that was getting divorced in front of him. Interesting, right? And another thing, the judges, they have to try to uphold, this the judicial oath and this role of objectivity and neutrality, and they can't really be political, right? And I had a trial a couple of months ago before the election, and I was driving up and down to Provo every day. And I saw billboards every day, these digital billboards. And it was here in Utah, we have the judges are appointed by the governor, and then they are up for retention. If they don't get a certain approval, they can be booted out. And there's no pulling names here. It was Judge Christine Johnson, who was quite fine with the case I had. And she didn't make all decisions in my favor by any stretch, but I didn't certainly. Well, I felt bad that she wasn't able to defend herself. That's what it comes down to. Because I saw that big billboard and vote her out, and it gave no specifics. And then I went down there in front of her, a very normal courtroom, I'll call it. And it just kind of highlights, wow, you can't come out. You can't defend yourself. I would have such a hard time with that. I don't think I could do that.
Yeah.
They're talking about me. I got to straighten it out. And so it's tough being a judge. It's tougher being a cop. And they buried one today down in Provo. And there's a family that lost a dad and some beautiful woman that lost her husband. And thank a cop. Back to the church, Alan. Back to the church. The Catholic Church is in a crisis. Not only the child sex abuse crisis, which is just so hideous. I think its humanity is in a crisis. That this has happened, that this was allowed to happen in an institution that is designed for good, and does a lot of good, but then grew into this. And I think that we're afraid to call it what it is. It's institutional. It's so widespread. How can it be that thousands and thousands and thousands of young men and women, lives are destroyed? And there are documents in the Catholic Church that would likely verify some of that. Who, what, when. And those things are not disclosed. they still sort of remain concealed, as hidden. And of course, they say it's just a bunch of rogue priests, right? Well, how is it then you move them around? Why you move them around? Why did they need to be moved around? Was it because there was an allegation that they had done something wrong? And if you're a leader in an institution and something like this happens and you turn a blind eye to it because it's also your paycheck.
Right.
And you turn a blind eye to it the second time or the third time or the fourth time. And now a certain amount of time goes by. You can't come clean anymore because you're dirty.
Right.
And that's my explanation to the Catholic Church's response to this sickening scandal.
Self-preservation or just complicity?
Well, great point, Alan. It is self-preservation. It is complicit without any responsibility.
Right.
Without any, well, that might be not fit exactly, but it raises that point, okay? The affirmative duty to act, the affirmative duty to do something. And we all have these conflict of interest, and I think these people at the church have conflicts of interest, and that they're afraid to cough it up because of how it's going to make them look. And it can creep up on you, right? You ignore one, you ignore two, you ignore three, and what do you know? Boom, suddenly you're in on it. And back to the Holocaust. In The Crime of Complicity, Professor Giora has a photo of Platform 9, I think it is, and a little house next to it where you could see the Jewish folks getting on the trains to hell. And no criminal liability for the failure to act. And the incredible thing is that Professor Giora's mother was saved by somebody acting, because she and her mother had been taken to a courtyard in Budapest and lined up to be shot. And her mother hid her. Grandma hid mom in front of her and told mom, when the shots go off, fall down and don't move till it gets dark. Play dead. And right then, a crowd came through, some young guys or something that were trying to disturb these things, and they claimed that there was some attack or something going on. And so that was foiled, or he wouldn't be here up at the University of Utah. And so, just by luck, well, and like I say, that was sort of the affirmative duty, right? They're doing it, and there's the good moral character at work, right? But we can't rely on that, because while she was saved, think about how many that weren't, how many that were murdered. And again, if that doesn't change your feeling on it, what will on complicit liability? Should Jerry Seinfeld be in jail for making fun of the fat guy that was getting beat up? Should Jerry Seinfeld spend a day in jail? And Elaine and Kramer and George, right? It's funny to think like that, but should they, spend a day in jail? You didn't do the right thing. You didn't help out. I think the answer is yes. I think it's a resounding yes. And when Professor Giora was first on, I was skeptical. In fact, I bought his book back in March or April because I'm intrigued by that little subject, and I thought that I would get involved and disagree with him, because I was indoctrinated sort of the old way in a criminal law. You got to have this mental blah, blah, blah. That's all sort of washed away. And where it really started to wash away when he was sitting in this chair that I'm in now, and raised it with respect to sex abuse, child sex abuse, or any kind of sexual violence. And I thought to myself, well, that makes sense. And I wasn't thinking about the Catholic Church at that time. I was thinking about the innumerable variations of someone close to a situation that knows that a child is being sexually abused. And if you don't do something about that, in these certain limits, right, like Professor Gior's factors, et cetera. But if you meet all those factors and you don't do anything about that, make a call. You can't sit in the room next door while the kid's being raped in the bedroom next to you.
No.
Is that the world we've created? Is that the world that we'll tolerate? Because that's what I see happening to the Catholic Church. Because nobody had an obligation to call each other out. And it grew into a monster, beyond a monster. And the response is not adequate. There was supposed to be a conference, Alan, in November for the U.S. bishops. And so you got the priests, the bishops above them, the cardinal. But they're going to have a commission on how to deal with now the allegations against the bishops. Okay? And they're starting some new commission. Okay? So there's allegations against bishops. And they're trying to set up a commission on how to deal with that. And they were supposed to have a meeting in November, and then the Vatican canceled that meeting. And a lot of people are upset with that because they were hoping to get some answers, see some affirmative action by the church, some self-awareness, and some action. And instead it was canceled. And so there's a little speculation on that. There is a meeting coming up, I think it's next month, of a worldwide meeting of bishops. And it may be that they wanted to take these new things that they're doing, and apply them sort of worldwide. But it doesn't look good that they canceled that meeting.
No, it doesn't.
And get to it. No more delay. No more waiting around. The Catholic Church has got to get its act together or it won't exist. Period.
Yes.
Because you can't have your faith where you go in every time and you think, is this a good one or a bad one? And they made it that way by not calling people out. They made it that way. So now you enter that place of worship, I do, and I'm confused. I'm confused. And I know a lot of Catholics are. And it can't be swept under the rug. It can't be shuffling the priests around. It's got to be some admissions. There's got to be people going to jail for it. They're criminals. Whoever was doing it, they're criminals. I don't care if you're a priest, bishop, the cardinal, or the Pope himself. If you did that, you're a criminal. And if you covered it up, you should be a criminal.
Agreed.
You can't just move them around. No. You can't just move the priests around. And so what's going to happen with the Catholic Church? It's really interesting. A shortage of nuns, a shortage of sisters, a shortage of priests, a congregation that can't help but question their beliefs. Can't help but question their beliefs in this awful way. Not talking about, miracles and goodness or, I don't even know what else to say, but in this just awful, most awful, awful way. You're telling me, I was indoctrinated in Catholic school. I went to Catholic high school, Catholic church my whole life, and this is what's going on? This is what's been going on? And this is the response to it? So now they're going to figure out how to investigate the bishops, the Catholic churches. They're going to figure out how to investigate the bishops themselves. Why don't they just cough up the documents? Why don't they come clean and clean out the whole place? And if it means that it's 50,000 of the 450,000, then so be it. Get rid of them. Because nobody's going to come back. If you have to keep going back and questioning, is this a good one or a bad one? And there's gray area and no real accountability, because it doesn't feel that way to me. It feels like it's just kind of some token gestures to it in passing. Something's got to be done.
Yeah.
Alan, one thing that has come out of this that gives the Catholic Church some hope is that despite the decline in priests and the decline in nuns, that there's an incredible increase in deacons and lay people. And in the Catholic Church, it's the priest that converts the wine and host into the bread and body of Jesus. And you have to be a priest to do that. But then to administer that communion, to hand it out to us as we come up, you can be a deacon. And so you don't have to be a priest. And there are many deacons now. And so it may be the changing face of the Catholic Church. It'll be interesting to see where it is a year or two from now. And I hope that the only way to overcome this, the only way to cure, is to come clean and somehow try to reinvent yourself. Wow, quick 2 hours. And we didn't only took one call. I think I was just too much on a one-liner here. We're done. Talk with Ted. Drive safe. Have a great week. I'll be on with Mark Shurtleff Thursday and back next week.